After watching Project Hail Mary, I left the cinema with a bit of a ridiculous thought. Why on earth did I care so much about that rock? I know, it sounds like the setup to a really bad joke, but here's the thing. I'm not the only one who felt that way. Everyone has seemed to completely fall in love with this rock. So, why have they? Well, on paper, Rocky really shouldn't have worked as well as he did. When you first meet him, Rocky is strange. And I don't mean strange in a cute, instantly marketable way. I mean genuinely alien. He isn't soft at all. He's abrasive. He's a rock. Every time he moves, you hear that heavy thud of someone who weighs more than a car. And this matters because if the film tried to make him too human too quickly, the whole thing would just collapse into sentimentality. Instead, it forces us to meet Rocky the same way Grace does. With a barrier. There's uncertainty there. There's curiosity. And this is where the film does something really smart. Film theorists sometimes call it alignment. We're completely locked into Grace's perspective, so we don't get to see Rocky from some safe, all-knowing distance. Instead, we learn how to read him at the exact same pace Grace does. And that is absolutely key. Grace teaches us how to see Rocky. He notices patterns, the logic of his movement, the rhythm of his responses, the consistency of his behaviour. The film doesn't ask us to love Rocky straight away. It asks us to learn how to read him. And it doesn't do it by cheating and turning him into a human in disguise. A lot of stories try to make non-human characters lovable by just making them basically human-shaped, human-faced, or emotionally simplistic. Essentially, they flatten the difference. But Project Hail Mary does the opposite. Rocky stays alien. The film doesn't ask us to love him because he's familiar, it asks us to love him because he's knowable. And the film does that not just through sight, but also through sound. Before we understand a single word Rocky says, we understand the intent in which he does everything by. His voice has rhythm, it has structure, and behind the scenes, the sound designers actually use flute-based instruments to give his alien chords a more natural breath, aiming for a musical sound rather than using computers or synthesizers. This makes it feel less like random noise and more like respiration. We don't just hear the sound, we hear the intention behind it. So, even before translation, the film is already doing something clever. It lets us hear an intelligence before we fully read it a friend. And that whole process is what makes the friendship feel earned. Because this isn't an instant connection, it's built piece by piece. At first, they need each other. They learn how to communicate. Then they begin to trust. And slowly, without the film ever announcing it too loudly, the scientific cooperation that they started with turns into real intimacy. That's the genius of the movie. It takes what could have been just plot mechanics like problem solving, survival, information exchange, and turns them into something personal. On top of this, the editing during these sequences functions like an evolutionary edit. It's not just showing the progress, it's showing the friction. We see fumbled gestures, mismatched tones, and the long, static pauses where nothing is understood. The film doesn't cut those out. Instead, it uses them to build a haptic history of their contact, a history you can almost feel. Every solved problem becomes another step in the relationship. Every act of help stops being functional and starts becoming personal. The camera keeps emphasizing that Rocky is physically there, not just as a concept, but as a body sharing space with Grace. And by the time the mission ends its final act, the film has achieved its miracle. We stop seeing a rock, and we start recognizing a mind. A real mind, one with intentions, fear, loyalty, curiosity, the capacity to care, and the capacity to suffer. That's why Rocky never feels like a sidekick. He's not there to decorate Grace's story. Grace teaches us how to see Rocky, but Rocky's story is ultimately what breaks our hearts. Because the more clearly the film lets us understand him, the more unbearable his loneliness becomes. Not just physical isolation, not just being far away in space, but the deeper kind of loneliness. The absence of someone who can know you. Someone who can meet you in space between survival and companionship and make that space feel a little less empty. That's what makes the ending land. Not spectacle, not scale. Rocky is no longer the alien. He's a friend. And once the film has pulled that off, every sacrifice means more. Every act of care means more. Because the story has shifted from can they solve the problem to something much more human. What does it mean to find someone in the middle of the impossible and then realize how close you came, never knowing them at all? That's why so many people came out of this film asking the same absurd question. Why am I crying over a rock? You're crying because Project Hail Mary understands that empathy doesn't begin with similarity. It begins when a story teaches you how to recognize another mind. We don't love Rocky because he becomes familiar. We love him because the film teaches us how to understand him. Empathy here isn't automatic. It's earned through attention. We do not care because Rocky is a rock. We care because, by the end of the film, he's no longer just a rock. He's somebody.
Hi, Grace.
You're in a ball.